pack healer's wing smelled of pine resin and crushed moonflower. It was a scent Vivian had learned to associate with pain, dressed up as care. The healers burned those candles at every difficult birth, every long labor, every moment when a woman's body was pushed past what seemed survivable. The smell was supposed to be soothing. To Vivian, it had become the smell of enduring. She stood in the stone corridor outside the healer's room, 3 hours after delivering her son into the world. Her feet were bare against the cold floor. Her body still trembled, the deep, involuntary kind that has nothing to do with temperature. She had been told to rest. She had been told not to move. She had listened to none of it, because the healer had taken the baby for the routine moon blessing, and the room had become too quiet, and the quiet had felt too much like being alone. She was used to being alone. She was just not used to knowing it so completely. She had walked toward the water room at the end of the corridor. That was all she intended. A cup of water. A moment of air that did not smell like moonflower and suffering. She heard his voice before she saw him. Low, unhurried, the voice of a man who had already put the hard part of his evening behind him. She stopped walking. Around the corner, past the narrow gap in the stone passage, Alpha King Sebastian, her mate, her partner, the man whose child she had just pushed into the world after 11 hours with no one holding her hand, was speaking to someone in the private alcove off the main hall. The voice that answered him was soft, familiar, deliberately warm. Vivian did not move, while she told herself she would just hear a word or two. She told herself she was being paranoid, that exhaustion had sharpened her fear into something that was not real. And then Sebastian said, "I don't want to be here anymore, Camilla. I just want to go home, to my true family, to you." Vivian's hand found the wall. The stone was cold beneath her palm, solid, real. Everything else in that moment went soft and strange. The candlelight, the sound of her own breathing, the distant cry of a newborn being returned to a room where his mother no longer stood. She waited. She waited for him to correct himself. She waited for him to lower his voice in shame, or laugh nervously, or say something that would make what she had just heard make sense in a way that didn't cost her everything. He did not. She turned around. She walked back. One step, then another, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor. And something inside her, something that had been straining for 4 years against the weight of hope, went very, very still. Not broken. Still. The way a forest goes silent before something moves through it. The healer placed her son back in her arms as she lowered herself onto the bed. He was small and dark-haired, with silver-grey eyes that already seemed to hold more steadiness than anyone else in that stronghold. She looked at him for a long time without speaking. She did not cry. She was past that particular form of release. The Alpha King believed his Luna was resting. He had no idea that the most dangerous thing in the Nightcrest pack had just opened its eyes. "Hey, before we go any further, I need to check on you for a second. How are you feeling right now?" It's because stories like this, they hit deep. And I want you right here with me as it unfolds. Thank you for being here. It truly means more than you know. If this story is already pulling at your heart, and I know it is, take a moment to support the channel. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's get back to the story. Vivian was 26 years old when she became Sebastian Nightcrest's Luna. She had not arrived at that title easily or accidentally. She was a daughter of the Silverfang bloodline, a line with deep roots in the Eastern Territories, known for sharp minds and longer memories than most packs cared to develop. Her father had been an alliance keeper, Her mother had been a record-bearer. Vivian had grown up understanding that information was the quietest and most reliable form of power a person could hold. She had set most of that aside when she bonded with Sebastian. Not because he asked her to exactly. He had never said, in so many words, "I need you smaller." But the life of a Luna in the Nightcrest pack had a shape to it, and that shape did not leave room for a woman who thought in strategies and kept notes and knew pack law better than most of the council. The shape required grace at formal dinners, silence during disputes, a smile that communicated warmth without opinion, and a consistent willingness to be supportive without being present. She had fit herself into that shape. She had done it carefully and completely, and the way a woman does when she loves someone and believes that love is enough to sustain the sacrifice. She had given Sebastian her Eastern family territory in the bonding agreement. She had left her own ambitions behind, like a coat she didn't need in a warmer place. She had memorized pack law, not to use it, but to serve him better, to anticipate the questions he had not thought to ask, to quietly shore up every weak point in his governance without taking credit for any of it. She had been the perfect Luna, and 3 hours ago she had given him a son. Alone. He had arrived at the birth 12 minutes after Calum entered the world. He had held the baby once, briefly, with the careful distance of a man performing a duty he understood intellectually, but had not yet connected to emotionally. He had kissed Vivian's forehead, once and lightly, and said something about needing to greet the visiting pack lords who were still waiting in the main hall. She had nodded. She had told him to go. She had believed, for those 12 minutes, that once the visiting lords were handled, he would return. He did not. Now she lay in the healer's bed, with Calum pressed to her chest, and the echo of 3 words rearranging everything she thought she understood about her life. My true family. In the human world, those might have been careless words, the kind a tired, overwhelmed person says in a weak moment without understanding their full weight. But Vivian didn't live in the human world. She lived in a world where words had roots, where true family and true mate carried a spiritual weight that no one with wolf blood said without understanding exactly what they meant. Like Sebastian had known. He had always known. He had said those words with the ease of someone saying something he had believed for a long time and had simply never said out loud before. She thought about the past 4 years. She thought about how gradually, so slowly that she could not have named the moment it began, she had been removed from the rooms that mattered. How her name disappeared from documents she had helped write. How decisions she had shaped were announced as his alone. How council members had stopped directing questions at her, even when she was standing directly beside him. How she had started to feel like a decoration in a home that had once been her own. She had told herself it was adjustment. She had told herself it was the nature of the Luna role. She had told herself that being invisible to the room meant she was trusted enough not to need to perform. She had been making excuses for years. She looked down at Calum. His eyes, those strange, steady, silver-grey eyes, were open, watching her face with the focused intensity of someone taking an important measurement. "You are mine," she whispered. Her voice did not waver. "And I am yours. That is the only loyalty that matters now." Calum made a small sound, not quite contentment, not quite protest, something in between. Vivienne held him closer. She did not know yet what she was going to do. She did not have a plan, a timeline, a clear shape of what came next. But she knew, with the bone-deep certainty of someone who has just heard a truth that changes the architecture of everything, that she would never again ask Sebastian Nightcrest for permission to matter. That much she was sure of. The moonflower candles burned low. The pine resin scent slowly faded into something cooler, something that smelled faintly like river air coming in through the high stone window. Vivian breathed it in. Then she straightened her spine, adjusted her sun against her chest, and began, very quietly, very deliberately, to think. The days after Caelum's birth moved the way all difficult time moves. Slowly when you were inside it, impossibly fast when you tried to look back. Vivian healed. She fed her son. She smiled at the right moments and kept her voice pleasant, and thanked the servants for the food they brought, and accepted the congratulations of the pack members who came to offer formal blessing to the heir. She was very good at this. She had been practicing for 4 years. Sebastian moved back into his full schedule the morning after the birth. She heard him in the corridor before she saw him, already on his communication device, already speaking with the crisp certainty of a man who had filed the previous day's events and moved on. He stopped at her doorway, looked at her and Caelum with an expression that was genuinely warm in its surface and completely absent in its depth. "You look well," he said. "I'm healing," she answered. He nodded, as if that settled the matter, and left. He referred to Caelum's birth at the pack dinner 2 evenings later as good news for the bloodline. He said it the way someone announces a successful business outcome, pleased, resolved, already oriented toward the next item. Now Vivian watched from her seat at the table and noticed who laughed, who nodded, who looked at her with a flicker of something they would not name. She noticed everything. She had always noticed everything. She had just spent 4 years not writing it down. That changed. She started keeping notes in the leather journal she had carried since her Silver Fang years, the old one with the dark green cover and the silver thread binding, the one Sebastian had never once asked about. She did not write feelings. Feelings were hers alone and always would be. She wrote facts, dates, names, descriptions of conversations, financial changes, access she no longer had that she used to, decisions announced with her invisible fingerprints on them. The household account access was the first formal loss that made the pattern undeniable, for she had managed the Luna's household fund for 3 years. Every domestic decision in the stronghold, staffing, provisions, seasonal preparations, the small but essential operations that kept a pack home running, had been handled through that account. It was not a glamorous responsibility, but it was real authority, and it was hers. She logged into the account management system one morning while Caelum napped and found herself locked out. A polite notice informed her that management of the account had been restructured. She asked Sebastian about it that evening, calmly, without accusation. He waved a hand. "Bennett is handling the accounts now. You should focus on the baby. You've been through a lot." She looked at him steadily. She said, "Of course." He did not notice the absence of agreement in her voice, because he was already looking elsewhere. She added it to the journal. The mandatory pack gathering happened 10 days after the birth. All ranked wolves attended. It was law, not preference. And Vivian arrived composed, her recovery worn quietly beneath a dress in deep green that had always made her look more settled than she felt. She left Caelum with the nursemaid, because pack gatherings were not for children, still adjusting to the noise of the world. She had expected to see Camilla Thornfield. She had known, in the abstract, guarded way of someone who has sensed a shape in the dark without quite seeing it clearly, that Camilla existed in Sebastian's life in a way that exceeded what was appropriate. She had known and had not let herself know fully, because full knowing would have required action. And action was harder when your child was still unborn and your only leverage was love. But Caelum was born now. Camilla Thornfield was not what Vivian had expected in the specific details. She was warm-voiced, and the room adjusted to her, in the subtle, unconscious way rooms adjust to people who are absolutely certain they belong. She was not loud. She did not perform her confidence. She simply occupied space as if it had always been hers. She greeted Vivian first. "You must be Vivian," she said, with a smile that held no apology and no guilt. Only the settled calm of a woman who believes the matter is already decided. "Sebastian speaks of you often. Speaks of, not loves, not misses, not worships or treasures or any of the words a mate might use. Just speaks of, the way someone mentions a standing obligation, a regular appointment, something reliable in the calendar. He speaks of you as well," Vivian said. She had no idea if this was true. She said it because it was the kind of thing that made a conversation end cleanly, and she needed this conversation to end. She watched Sebastian across the room for the rest of the gathering. She had spent 4 years watching him in rooms, watching how he moved, who he sought, what his body communicated when words were not required. She knew his rhythms the way a person knows the weather patterns of a place they have lived in too long. When he found Camilla near the far window, his posture changed. The difference was not dramatic. It never was, with Sebastian. But his shoulders dropped. The line of his jaw softened. He became, in some quiet and fundamental way, less defended, as if a weight he carried everywhere else simply did not exist in that particular orbit. He had never looked that way around Vivian, not at their bonding ceremony, not in any of the 4 years between that day and this one. She stayed through the rest of the gathering. She said what was required. She thanked who needed thanking. She left when it was appropriate to leave. In the carriage on the way back to the stronghold, she sat with her hands folded in her lap and allowed herself, for the first time, to see the past 4 years without the softening lens of love. The contributions absorbed without credit. The rooms she had been quietly moved out of. The access removed. The name erased. The presence made convenient and invisible in the same motion. She had been so afraid of what clear-eyed honesty would cost her. She was done being afraid. Fear had done its job, she thought, as the stronghold gates opened ahead of her. What remained was something steadier, something that looked very much like purpose. In Nightcrest Pack tradition, what the Alpha King names the heir, this was not a casual custom. It was law, old, formal, and deeply embedded in the Pack's understanding of power and bloodline. The naming happened at the moon ceremony, in front of witnesses, with council members present, the Alpha's declaration, binding the child's identity to the Pack's public record. It was the first act of formal authority over a new life, and it belonged by tradition to the father. Sebastian had already told Bennett Northwood to schedule the ceremony. Vivian had heard him mention it in passing, the way he mentioned anything that required logistics, but not emotional labor. She named her son anyway. Alone, in the healer's wing. At midnight, 'twas when the only light was the low amber glow of the moon through the high stone window and the single candle she had left burning on the table by Calum's crib. She lifted him from the crib. He was awake. He was often awake in those midnight hours, not crying, just watching the ceiling with those steady silver-grey eyes, as if there was something up there worth observing. "Calum," she said softly, in the old silver-fang tongue her mother had taught her. Her voice was low, private, deliberate. "It means sky, because you will belong to no cage. In the old records, the Pack Law archives she had organized years ago as part of her lunar responsibilities, there was a provision that modern Nightcrest governance had quietly stopped teaching, but had never formally removed. A mother's naming, spoken in her bloodline's tongue, in the presence of a moon witness, carried spiritual weight that preceded and could not be overridden by any ceremonial declaration. She had found this provision 4 months before Kylam was born. She had not known at the time exactly why she copied it into her personal records. She had told herself it was simply interesting history. She understood now that she had been preparing longer than she consciously realized. Kylam looked up at her face when she said his name. He made a sound, small, soft, nothing like language, but with the clear quality of recognition. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's you." 2 mornings later there was a knock at the healer's wing door. Penelope Winterbourne entered without waiting to be invited, which suggested she knew she would be welcome. She was perhaps 60, but with the kind of face that had long since stopped trying to look anything other than what it was: watchful, unhurried, sharp in all the ways that mattered. She served no single alpha. She served the law, and had for decades. She sat down across from Vivian without ceremony, and looked at Kylam for a moment with the careful attention of someone taking inventory. Then she looked at Vivian. "I heard you named him," she said. Vivian met her eyes. "Is that why you came?" "I came," Penelope said, in the quiet, measured way of someone who has been patient for a very long time, "because I have been waiting for you to be ready." The conversation that followed was one of the most important Vivian had ever had, and it looked from the outside like 2 women discussing old documents over cooling tea. Penelope did not offer to fight for her. She was not that kind of ally. She was the kind that taught, that illuminated, that placed information in front of a ready mind and trusted it to do the necessary work. She explained, with the unhurried precision of someone who had watched this exact pattern repeat across pack generations, what Vivian's actual position was under old law, not the restructured, conveniently simplified version Sebastian's governance operated by, but the original provisions that had never been struck from the formal record. A Luna who could demonstrate consistent primary care, combined with documented evidence of financial removal and pressure toward relocation, created protections for the heir's guardian that superseded an Alpha King's territorial authority in custody matters. A mother who could prove she had been the functioning center of a child's life, and that the primary household posed instability, could not be separated from the heir without full council consensus. Sebastian had built his power on pack law. He had simply never imagined it might be read carefully by someone who knew it as well as he did. "This isn't a path to revenge," Penelope told her, watching her face. "I know," Vivian said. "It's a path to ground, stable ground, for you and for him." She nodded at Kylam. "I know," Vivian said again. "That's why I'm going to take it." That night, after Penelope left, and Kylam had drifted into the deep, unconscious sleep of the newly fed, Vivian sat at the small writing table in the corner of the room and opened the old journal. She had brought it with her from the stronghold. She had packed it the way she packed anything that was truly hers. Quietly, quickly, yet without making it notable. She did not write feelings. She wrote the date, the meeting with Penelope, the legal provisions Penelope had walked her through, the financial removal, the names, the access she no longer had. Every specific, verifiable, documented fact about the months leading to this night. Her handwriting was steady. Her hands did not shake. In the corridor outside, Sebastian passed by on his way to his private study. He glanced briefly through the open doorway, saw his Luna bent over something at the table, assumed she was writing letters, and moved on without asking. He never asked, and Vivian wrote on, quietly building the structure that would one day stand between him and everything he had assumed was permanently his. Colton, Sebastian, changed, not in the way of a man who had decided to be cruel. That would have been easier to name, easier to oppose directly. He changed the way weather changes before a storm, A pressure drop, a shift in the air, a quality of light that is not quite right before the sky tears open. He started being kind. Not the old surface kindness of a man who is not paying attention. This was considered deliberate. He began appearing at the healer's wing more regularly, bringing food she had not asked for, asking how she was sleeping with actual patience for the answer. He told her she seemed tired. He told her the stronghold had a lot of pressure, and he worried about whether it was the right environment for a recovering woman and a newborn. She let him talk. She watched his eyes while he did. His eyes were the eyes of a man constructing a narrative. She had seen him construct narratives for 4 years. She had helped him build some of them. She knew exactly what she was watching. 10 days after Caleb's birth, Sebastian sat across from her at the small table in the healer's wing. Just the two of them, no witnesses, the door closed, and slid a document across the surface toward her. She looked at it without picking it up. The language was smooth and formal, a temporary lunar wellness relocation, a provision written in pack law as a rest and recovery option for lunars in difficult postpartum circumstances. In its original application, it had been genuine welfare legislation. In Sebastian's hands, it was a tool of management. The outer lodge, a modest allowance. Time to rest and recover away from the pressure of stronghold life. "This isn't punishment," he said. His voice was warm, concerned, the voice of a man who had been practicing. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. "Practical," she said finally, turning the word over like something she was examining for flaws. He smiled, just slightly, just enough. The smile of a man who believes that silence is agreement. "You'll thank me when you've had time to rest." She did not smile back. "You will understand eventually what you have done," she said. She said it quietly. No threat in her voice. No anger, no tears, no dramatic weight. Just the even, unhurried tone of someone stating a fact that will prove itself in time. He heard it as emotion. He catalogued it as grief. He let it pass because grief, in his experience, passed. He was wrong about that too. She began packing before he left the room. Not everything. Not in the way of someone who planned to fight visibly. She took Caleb's essentials. She took her journal. She took the leather satchel that held the documents she had been copying, quietly. As over the past 10 days, pages from the pack archive she had organized years ago, alliance records she had helped compile, treaty correspondence written in her handwriting and signed with his seal. She took everything that was truly hers. At the door, she paused. She let herself look back once, at the stone walls she had navigated for 4 years, the amber lanterns she had come to know like old acquaintances, the corridor where she had stood 3 hours after giving birth and heard the words that ended. Something she had not quite known was already over. Then she walked out. Sebastian expected her at the outer lodge by evening. She did not arrive. By the second day, he sent Bennett northward to check. Bennett returned with nothing but a polite message from the lodge's caretaker. The Luna had not appeared. By the third day, Sebastian had begun making discreet inquiries through pack channels, carefully worded, calibrated to sound like concern rather than a search, because no Alpha King wanted to be seen as a man who had lost his Luna. The allied pack contacts he reached returned polite, unhelpful answers. No one had seen her. No one was forthcoming about not having seen her. There is a specific quality to a conversation where someone knows more than they are saying, and Sebastian, who had conducted many such conversations himself, recognized it immediately. He called his wolf law specialist, a careful, thorough man named Chadwick Ashford, who knew the old law and the new law and all the territory between them. "She has taken the air without authorization," Sebastian said. Chadwick paused for exactly 1 beat. "Has she crossed any territorial boundaries?" "Not that we can confirm." Has she violated any specific condition of the wellness relocation order? Another pause. She has not communicated. Chadwick's voice when he answered was steady and very carefully neutral. Alpha, silence is not the same as abandonment. It is not the same as flight. It is not, under current pack law, a violation of any provision I can cite. Sebastian was quiet. Find out where she is, he said finally. Chadwick didn't tell him that finding a woman who didn't want to be found, a woman who had spent 4 years learning the infrastructure of a pack from the inside, was not a simple instruction. Meanwhile, in the Eastern Territory, in a modest stone cottage on old Silverfang land that technically still carried her bloodline's claim, Vivian nursed her son and listened to the river. The cottage was small and cold and imperfectly furnished. It had a borrowed crib, a kitchen that smelled like wood smoke and old herbs, and a window that caught the morning light in a long, golden band that swept across the stone floor and made the whole room feel warmer than it was. She slept more than 4 hours for the first time since the birth. She walked with Calum along the river at dawn, the air sharp and clean against her face. She did not think about the stronghold. She did not rehearse conversations she would never have or regret ones she might have said differently. She simply walked and breathed and felt the ground under her feet and understood, with quiet and increasing certainty, that she was not hiding. She was resetting. On the 4th evening, she sat at the cottage's old writing desk and composed a single message. Not to Sebastian, not to Bennett, not to anyone in the stronghold or connected to it, to Penelope Winterbourne. 2 words. I'm ready. Penelope arrived on the 2nd morning after the message, carrying a satchel of scrolls and the unhurried energy of a woman who had been looking forward to exactly this conversation. She sat at the cottage table across from Vivian while Calum slept in his borrowed crib, and they worked. It was not dramatic work. It did not feel like the building of something powerful. It felt like organizing, like bookkeeping, like the careful and patient assembly of a clear picture from pieces that had always existed. They had simply never been arranged to show what they actually showed. Vivian's documents, the alliance records with her handwriting and his seal, the treaty language she had written in quiet rooms while Sebastian hosted the dinners that preceded each agreement. The council correspondence she had initiated, drafted, and passed through Bennett for Sebastian's signature. 4 years of invisible labor, now visible, laid out in chronological order on an old wooden table in a stone cottage by a river, and alongside it, the financial records. The account access removed within 72 hours of the birth. The household fund restructured without her knowledge or consent. The wellness relocation pressure applied to a woman still physically recovering from labor. Penelope had also brought something else. The name of Montgomery Silvercrest, the Allied Pack Council's current head. A careful man, known for valuing stability over political convenience. A man who, Penelope indicated quietly, Ted had been observing the Nightcrest Alpha's governance with increasing concern over the past 2 years. Not acting on that concern. Not yet. But observing. This isn't revenge, Vivian said. She said it almost to herself, the same words she had said to Penelope in the healer's wing. It seemed important to keep saying them, to make sure the impulse behind this work stayed clean. Penelope looked at her steadily over the edge of her reading glasses. No, it's accountability. There's a difference, and you know it. They worked until Calum woke for his evening feeding, and then they worked again after. By the time Penelope left, the foundation of a formal inquiry to the Allied Pack Council existed. Not accusations, not emotional appeals, but documented patterns. The kind that made stability claims complicated, or the kind that made councils ask questions. Back at the Nightcrest stronghold, Sebastian was unraveling in the quiet way of a man who does not understand what is happening to him yet. He still had the title. He still had the seat. But the conversations around him had shifted in quality, just slightly, the way light shifts when a cloud moves across the sun. The Allied pack contacts who had always been reliably warm were still warm, but with a new deliberateness to it, a care that had not been there before. Questions had appeared in his recent correspondence that he could not quite trace to a source. Inquiries about the Nightcrest Alliance record-keeping, requests for documentation of decisions he had made in the past 2 years. He could not find where the questions were coming from. He could not find his Luna. He could not find Chadwick Ashford's calm, because Chadwick's calm had developed a quality of professional distance that Sebastian found deeply uncomfortable. He called Bennett Northwood into his office. "Find her. We've been looking. Find her." Bennett's expression was carefully composed. "Sebastian, if the council has been notified of her location, there may be protections in place that—" I said, "Find her." Bennett nodded and left. He did not tell Sebastian what he suspected, that Vivian's silence was not the silence of a lost woman, but the silence of a prepared one, and that there was a significant difference between those two things. Across the stronghold, in the private suite that had gradually, over the past 2 years, become understood to be Camilla Thornfield's, Camilla herself was performing a kind of calculation. She was not a cruel woman. She was a practical one. She had moved into Sebastian's life the way water moves into available space, finding the openings, filling the gaps, making herself necessary in the places where he felt least understood. She had believed, when she allowed herself to believe anything, that being chosen by the Alpha King was a position of security. It was becoming clear to her that she had misread the nature of that security. The dinners had changed. The invitations that used to carry her name in their language now carried a slightly different formality that left her in a different category. Still included, but differently included, which to Camilla was not the same thing at all. The pack members who had previously sought her favor as a natural extension of seeking Sebastian's favor were now more careful, more diplomatic, more inclined to be cordially pleasant without investing. She heard the word unstable in a conversation she was not meant to be near. Then again, from a different mouth, in a different room, 2 days later. Both times it referred to the Nightcrest leadership situation. Neither time did anyone have to specify what aspect of the leadership situation they meant. Camilla was many things. She was not foolish. She had maintained alternate options her entire adult life, with the quiet discipline of someone who had learned early that options were the only reliable safety net. She began quietly to reactivate those options. She did not announce this. She did not discuss it with Sebastian. She simply began preparing to leave before leaving became necessary, because the difference between those two moments was the difference between dignity and disaster. Meanwhile, at the stone cottage by the river, Grayson Emberfang knocked on the door. Vivian had heard the footsteps on the path before the knock. Old reflex, pack-trained, impossible to train out. She had assessed the weight and pace of them before her hand touched the door. Unhurried, steady, no urgency in the step. Someone who was not here about anything that required speed. She opened the door. He was perhaps 30, with the quiet, weathered steadiness of someone who had spent years working land and weather rather than rooms and politics. A border wolf. She had seen him once or twice in the distance since arriving, moving along the eastern boundary with the focused efficiency of someone doing work they understood completely. But he was not a lord. He was not a council member. He had no title she recognized and no agenda she could read. He was holding a small jar of dark amber honey. "The Eastern holdings get cold fast," he said, in the direct, unhurried way of someone who says what they came to say. I thought you might want something warm." He held out the jar. He did not try to come inside. She took it. She looked at him for a moment, long enough to take an accurate measure, which was something she was very good at. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and turned to walk back down the path. No further explanation, no curiosity about what she was doing here, or who she was, or what she was recovering from. No performance of helpfulness, no positioning, no attempt to make the gesture mean more than it was. He simply left. Vivienne looked down at the honey, was then down at Calum, who had woken at the sound of the door and was regarding her from his crib with those silver-grey eyes. He had not cried at the sound of the knock. He had not cried at the unfamiliar voice. He was simply watching her, the way he always did, with that attentive steadiness that she was beginning to suspect was just who he was going to be. "Good instincts," she told him. She filed Grayson Emberfang in the part of her mind reserved for things that were not urgent, but were worth remembering. That evening, by the window, with Calum asleep against her chest and the inquiry documents spread across the table and the river gleaming silver under the rising moon, Vivienne allowed herself something she hadn't allowed in a long time. A small, quiet, careful sense of possibility. Not happiness yet. Not hope in the full, open-handed way of someone who trusts the future completely. Just the first dim warmth of a fire that has been lit from almost nothing and is beginning, slowly, to take hold. She let it stay. She did not talk herself out of it. For the first time in longer than she could name, Vivienne Silverfang Nightcrest sat in a room that felt like hers and allowed herself to imagine what the next year of her life might look like. It looked nothing like the one she had been living. She was surprised by how little that frightened her. The Allied Pack Council's neutral hall was held in Silvercrest territory, a place designed specifically to belong to no single alpha, with pale stone walls and windows that admitted a cool, grey morning light that had no interest in flattering anyone. It was not a dramatic room. It was a deliberate one, and everything in its design communicated the same thing. Here, only evidence matters. Vivienne arrived alone. Calum was with Juliet Darkmoor, her childhood friend, the one person from her life before the stronghold, who had reappeared the moment word reached her of what was happening. Juliet had driven through the night to reach the eastern cottage, arriving with food and the efficient, unsentimental care of someone who had known Vivienne since they were girls running through Silverfang Forest, and understood that what she needed was not comfort, but company. She had taken Calum from Vivienne's arms with the practiced ease of someone who had raised younger siblings, and said simply, "Go. I have him. Go." Vivienne wore no ornament, no lunar jewelry, no title display, no visual language of rank or formality. She wore a dress in deep or quiet blue that had belonged to her mother. Old fabric, well made, with the kind of simple elegance that does not need to announce itself. She carried only the leather satchel and the steady, collected presence of someone who had been building to this moment for months. Sebastian arrived, flanked by Chadwick Ashford and Bennett Northwood. Chadwick wore the careful composure of a man managing a case he had serious doubts about. Bennett wore the expression of someone who wished, deeply and privately, that he were elsewhere. Sebastian himself had not yet processed the depth of what was happening. He still expected, at some level, to walk into this room and recover control of the narrative, the way he had always recovered control of rooms. He had always been good in formal settings. He was confident, articulate, or practiced in the art of appearing entirely reasonable while pursuing outcomes that primarily served him. He looked at Vivienne when he entered, and something shifted briefly behind his eyes. An assessment, a recalibration. She looked prepared. He had not planned for prepared. Chadwick presented Sebastian's case first. The language was smooth, professional, built from the right elements. Sebastian's financial standing, his territorial authority, his bloodline, the structural fact of his Alpha King status. Vivian's absence from the stronghold was framed as instability. The wellness relocation was described as a reasonable provision made in the Luna's best interest. The custody claim rested on Sebastian's formal position and material ability to provide for the heir. It was a good case. It would have been a very effective case, but in a room that had not yet heard the other side. Vivian did not react to any of it. She sat with her hands folded on the table and listened, and the stillness of her listening was itself a kind of answer. She was not surprised by any of this, which meant she had anticipated all of it, which meant she had prepared for all of it. Penelope Winterbourne stood as Vivian's lawful advocate. She did not begin with emotion. She had never in her decades of counsel work begun anything with emotion, because emotion, however genuine, was not evidence. She began with dates, a timeline, 4 years of documented lunar contributions, specific alliance negotiations with Vivian's notes in the margins of the original drafts, treaty language written in her handwriting, a council correspondence she had authored and passed through Bennett for Sebastian's signature, PAC strategy sessions where her analysis appeared in the working documents, and her name appeared nowhere in the official record. Then the financial documentation, account access removed within 72 hours of birth, household management restructured without consent or notice, a wellness relocation order issued to a woman 11 days postpartum, framed as care, structured as removal. Then the inquiry questions, the ones that had been appearing in the Allied Council's record regarding Nightcrest's alliance management, questions surfaced by the patterns in the documents Vivian had compiled, not accusations, discrepancies, the kind that make councils uncomfortable, the kind that make the word stability difficult to use with confidence. The Montgomery Silvercrest, seated at the head of the council, leaned forward. He addressed Bennett Northwood directly, with the calm and particular attention of someone who already knows what answer they expect. Mr. Northwood, how long has this internal review of the Nightcrest Alliance record been active? Bennett's pause was brief. 1 second, perhaps less. But in a council hall, a pause at the wrong question has the weight of a statement. "Several weeks," he said. "Was this disclosed in the preliminary filing?" Another pause. "It was not," he said carefully. The silence that followed was not long, but it echoed. When it was Vivian's turn, she stood. She did not speak of betrayal. She did not say Sebastian's name with any particular weight. She did not mention Camilla Thornfield once. She did not reach for the word heartbreak, or unfaithful, or any of the language of a wounded wife making an emotional appeal. She spoke about Calum's feeding schedule, about the river walks at dawn, about the pediatric wellness visits she had arranged and attended in the Eastern Territory, detailed records showing consistent, attentive, present parenting in the week since his birth, about the support structure she had built around her son, Penelope's visits, Juliet's presence, the stability of the cottage and its routines, and the river that Calum watched through the window with those serious, silver-grey eyes every morning. She spoke about presence, about routine, about safety. Not once did she make it about herself. The contrast between her testimony and Sebastian's documentation, between a mother speaking about her child's daily reality and a legal team speaking about an alpha's financial standing, was not something anyone in that room needed to have pointed out. It simply existed, and they all felt it, and the feeling shifted something in the room's understanding that would not shift back. Montgomery Silvercrest looked between Sebastian and Vivian for a long moment. Then to Sebastian, with the quiet and absolute authority of someone who has made his decision. "This council evaluates reliability, Alpha Nightcrest, not income, not title, Not bloodline alone. Reliability. Something in Sebastian's posture broke. It was not visible to most of the room. It was barely visible at all. But Vivian saw it. She had spent 4 years learning to read him, and this particular break was the one she had been waiting for. He understood. Finally, fully, he understood. She had not come to destroy him. She had not come in anger or revenge, or with the specific goal of his ruin. She had come with the simple, devastating thing that neither he nor anyone around him had ever thought to account for. She had come with the truth. Organized, documented, patient, and irrefutable. The session adjourned. In the corridor outside, Sebastian found her alone for a moment. Just the two of them. The rest of the corridor empty, the sound of the council chamber's doors still settling behind them. "You planned this," he said. His voice was quiet. Not angry, or hollow in the way of a man who has just heard an echo and realized the room he thought was full has always been empty. Vivian adjusted the strap of her satchel on her shoulder. She looked at him with the clear, level eyes of someone who has nothing left to perform. "I planned to survive," she said. "That is what I do." She walked past him. He stood alone in the corridor and watched her go. And for perhaps the first time in his life, Sebastian Nightcrest had no idea what to do with his own hands. She did not look back. Not once. The ruling arrived on an ordinary morning. Vivian was at the cottage window, Calum settled against her hip, the river below catching the early light in fragments. Silver, then gold, then something between the two that did not have a clean name. She had made tea. The cottage smelled of wood smoke and warm bread, that which Juliet had baked the night before and left cooling on the table before driving back to her own life, full of the cheerful noise of a woman who leaves a place better than she found it. The message notification appeared on her communication device. From Penelope. She opened it. She read it once. She read it again. Primary physical and legal guardianship of the heir, Calum of the Nightcrest bloodline, granted to the Luna, Vivian Silverfang Nightcrest. All decisions regarding health, residence, and formation are granted to the mother. Contact between the child and Alpha Nightcrest is limited to supervised council-mediated visitation, pending full review of outstanding inquiry matters. She did not shout. She did not drop to her knees or press her hands over her mouth, or do any of the things people do in stories when the moment they have been building toward finally arrives. She stood at the window with Calum on her hip, and the morning light coming through the glass, and she exhaled. Slow, full, complete. She pressed her forehead gently to her son's. "We're safe," she whispered. "We are home." Calum made a small, contented sound and reached for her hair with one tiny hand, the way he always did when he was calm. She let him hold it. Across the territory, in the stronghold, Sebastian received the same ruling at his desk. He read it standing, which was how he always received correspondence he intended to answer immediately. Then he sat. Then he read it again. Supervised visitation. He, who had been Alpha King, who had commanded alliance agreements across 5 territories, who had spoken for the Nightcrest bloodline in every significant negotiation of the past decade, was now a scheduled presence in his own child's life. Not because Vivian had engineered his destruction, not because she had been ruthless or manipulative or driven by revenge, but because the truth of the past 4 years, organized and presented clearly, had proven to be entirely sufficient. He reached for his communication device. He called Camilla. The call did not connect. He tried again, and again. On the 3rd attempt, a brief message arrived. No apology, no explanation, just the clean, efficient language of a woman who had already moved on. She had left for another territory. She wished him well. She hoped things would settle. She was gone. The woman he had called his true family left without a backward glance, without a goodbye, without any of the loyalty he had imagined resided in the choice he had made. She had wanted to stand beside power. Power, in its current form, was no longer what she had signed on for. She had calculated, and she had left, and in doing so had completed, without intending to, the full picture of what Sebastian had actually built his certainty on. He sat in the quiet of his study for a long time. There was no one left to rearrange the story. There was no narrative version of events that made him the reasonable center of it. There was only the room, and his own choices, and the perfectly clear understanding that he had arrived here entirely through his own decisions. It was the loneliest he had ever been. It was, he would understand later, what honesty felt like. Juliet Darkmoor arrived at the cottage that afternoon. She arrived the way she always arrived, with noise and food and the specific, uncomplicated warmth of someone who had known Vivian since before either of them understood who they were going to become. She had brought provisions, a bottle of something sparkling for a quiet celebration, and the immediate, joyful willingness to hold Calum for as long as he would allow it, which turned out to be a considerable amount of time. They sat in the kitchen while Calum slept in Juliet's arms, and the sparkling thing went mostly undrunk because Vivian was still nursing, and Juliet forgot she had brought it. And they talked, not about Sebastian, not about the council hearing, not about documents or law or strategy. They talked about small things, old memories, and the way Calum had his mother's exact, stubborn frown when he had decided he disagreed with something, and the way that frown appeared with surprising frequency for someone who was barely 3 weeks old. Vivian laughed, genuinely, without the weight of performance or the careful management of what she was letting people see. She laughed the way she had not laughed in longer than she could easily trace, and the sound of it in the small cottage kitchen surprised her a little. The way returning to something familiar after a long absence can feel both recognizable and new. Juliet looked at her over Calum's sleeping head and smiled the quiet, satisfied smile of someone who has been waiting for exactly this. "There you are," she said softly. Vivian did not answer. She just smiled back. The next morning, before the light had fully settled, there was a knock at the cottage door. She had heard the footsteps on the path already. She always heard them. She probably always would. Unhurried, steady, the weight of someone who is not in any particular hurry, not because they lack purpose, but because they are comfortable with their own pace. She opened the door before the second knock. Grayson Emberfang stood on the path. He was not carrying honey this time. He was carrying nothing at all. He stood in the early light with the settled, uncomplicated ease of someone who has thought about what he wanted to say and decided to say it simply. "I thought," he said, "that if you wanted company on the river walk, I know a good stretch on the east bank. Better light in the morning. Fewer rocks." He said it the way he said everything, directly, without layering it in more meaning than it held. An offer. Nothing more. She looked at him for a moment, assessed him, the way she assessed everything, with patience and accuracy, and the understanding that a person's quality was not in their words alone, but in the way they waited for an answer. He waited without filling the silence, without reassuring her, without reaching. "Give me a minute," she said. She settled Calum into the sling against her chest, pulled on her coat, and walked out. They walked along the east bank of the river as the morning light came fully in, warm and slow and indifferent to anything beyond the simple fact of being morning. Grayson walked at her pace, not slightly ahead the way men sometimes do, without realizing, not slightly behind in a way that would have felt like following. Just beside her, at her pace, with the river making its own quiet conversation to their left, and Calum pressed warm and solid against her chest. He did not ask about the council hearing. He did not ask about Sebastian. He did not perform curiosity about her situation or construct gentle openings for her to explain herself. He asked what Calum's name meant. She told him, Sky, because he will belong to no cage. And Grayson was quiet for several steps. The river moved. A bird somewhere upstream said something once and did not repeat it. That's a good name, he said. Nothing more. But Vivian noticed the way he had slowed his pace to match hers without looking down to measure it. The way he had placed himself between the wind and the baby without making it a gesture, without drawing attention to it, without expecting anything back from the small, natural kindness of it. She noticed these things the way she had always noticed things, carefully, without rushing to a conclusion. She did not name what she was noticing. Not yet. There was no need to name it. There was only the river and the light and her son's warm weight against her chest, and a person walking beside her who asked nothing and offered presents and did not find any of that complicated. She did not step away from any of it. That was new, and it felt, she realized, exactly like what it was. Safe. That night, with Calum asleep in the borrowed crib and the cottage quiet, and the river audible through the cracked window, Vivian sat in the old chair by the hearth and let herself be still. She thought about the woman she had been, the one who stood in the stone corridor outside the healer's wing and heard 3 words and waited in that first frozen moment for them to be taken back. She did not feel contempt for that woman. She had loved someone genuinely and completely, and loving someone genuinely is not a mistake, even when the person you love does not deserve it. What she had done wrong was not the love. It was the waiting. The long, careful, patient waiting for someone to choose her back, when all the evidence of 4 years had been telling her, quietly, in every small and large removal, that the choice had already been made, and she was not in it. She was done waiting for people to choose her. She had chosen herself. She had chosen Calum. She had chosen the river and the morning light and the stone cottage and the slow, careful, beginning life that was assembling itself around her in exactly the shape that fit. She thought about Grayson's unhurried footsteps on the path, about the honey he had brought for no reason, except that the eastern holdings get cold, and he thought she might want something warm, about the way he had walked beside her this morning without making it into anything more than what it was. She understood, or sitting there in the firelight with her son asleep nearby, that she was not afraid of connection anymore. She was simply unwilling to rush it. And that distinction, the difference between fear and discernment, felt like the most important thing she had learned in all of this. She had spent 4 years being needed as a function in someone else's life. She intended to spend the rest of her life being chosen as a person, wholly, clearly, by someone who understood the difference. And she was patient enough now to wait for exactly that. No sooner, no later. Just that. Dawn came the way it always came to the Eastern Territory, slowly, without announcement, the sky shifting from deep blue to silver, to the particular warm pink that means the sun is almost ready, but has not quite committed yet. Vivian stood at the riverbank. Calum was in the sling against her chest, awake but calm, watching the water the way he watched everything, with those steady, serious eyes that held more patience than most adults she had known. The river ran clear and fast over the smooth stones of the east bank. A bird crossed the pale sky above them, and Calum tracked it until it disappeared. She did not think about the stronghold. She did not think about what rooms looked like without her in them, or what Sebastian was doing with the quiet that had moved in to replace all the invisible work she had once performed for him. That life had ended, and its ending was not a wound anymore. It was simply a conclusion, the kind that closes a door and opens the window beside it. She breathed the morning air. It tasted like river and pine, and the faint sweetness that comes before full sunrise. Behind her, footsteps on the path. She turned. Grayson was coming down the bank with 2 cups of something warm. She could see the steam rising in the cool air. He raised one in her direction when he saw her looking, a question with no pressure in it. A simple, "Would you like this?" An offer of warmth with no debt attached. She walked toward him, not running, not fleeing, not surviving, walking. On ground that was finally, completely, undeniably her own. She took the cup. Their hands did not quite touch, and neither of them made it into anything. They stood at the river's edge together, while Calum regarded the water, and the morning finished arriving, and the sky above them opened into the full and unhurried blue of a day that belonged to no one and could not be claimed or managed or taken back. Sebastian Nightcrest had looked at his Luna and seen a duty completed. He had called another woman his true family, and believed that silence was agreement and patience was surrender, and a woman who did not fight back had accepted her defeat. He had not understood, and would spend a long time coming to understand, that the woman he had dismissed had been the truest, most structurally essential thing in his world. He had simply stopped deserving her, and she, finally, fully, completely, had stopped waiting for him to remember. Vivienne stood at the river in the morning light with her son against her chest and something warm in her hands, and a future that looked nothing like her past. And she was not afraid of any of it. She was, at last, exactly where she was supposed to be. And that simple, earned, undramatic fact was everything.